There's a reason the world keeps testing INFJs, and it's not because they're weak. It's because their silence, their depth, and their calm threaten what's shallow and chaotic. The INFJ doesn't fight back the way others expect. They observe, they absorb, and they adapt. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every disappointment becomes another lesson written deep into their soul, a lesson no one ever sees, but everyone feels when they meet them again. You see, when the world throws storms at an INFJ, they don't shatter, they reshape. Their empathy becomes sharper, their intuition stronger, and their boundaries unbreakable. They pass every test, not through aggression, but through understanding, not through revenge, but through rebirth. That's the quiet brilliance of the INFJ. They win in silence because their growth happens where no one is looking. If you've ever felt like you keep being tested for no reason, if you've stayed silent when others wanted to see you break, this message is for you, because what feels like punishment is actually preparation, shaping you into someone the noise of the world can no longer touch. If this speaks to you, subscribe to Brainy One, where deep minds and old souls find their reflection. And tell me in the comments, what's the hardest test life gave you, and what did it teach you about yourself? The repetition of life's tests. For the INFJ, life never repeats itself by accident. It echoes. Each test, each heartbreak, each disappointment feels eerily familiar, as if the universe keeps pressing on the same wound just to see if it still hurts. But beneath that repetition lies a hidden curriculum, a pattern that only the deeply perceptive can recognize. The INFJ doesn't face chaos because they're unlucky. They face it because their soul is built to transmute pain into wisdom. When the same kind of betrayal returns in a different face, when the same kind of silence echoes from a new voice, the INFJ understands this is not punishment, it's evolution in disguise. While most people react with frustration, the INFJ pauses. They step back from the noise and trace the outline of the experience like a detective of emotion. They see where trust became overextension, where kindness was mistaken for surrender, where hope blurred into denial, and rather than falling apart, they start rewriting the script. That's the secret to their quiet strength. They learn mid-pain. They don't need time to distance themselves from the lesson. They absorb it while still bleeding from it. It's the kind of resilience that makes people underestimate them until they know in the skiing stops repeating what no longer aligns. What's beautiful and tragic about this pattern is how internal it is. No one sees the growth while it's happening. From the outside, it might look like isolation or withdrawal, but inside, something sacred is occurring, a recalibration of soul and boundaries. The INFJ begins to see that not every storm is there to destroy them. Some arrive simply to remind them of their own durability. Eventually, they stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And begin whispering, what is this trying to teach me? And that's the turning point, the moment they shift from being tested by life to quietly mastering it. Because once an INFJ learns the lesson beneath the repetition, the cycle ends. Not with noise or confrontation, but with silent understanding. The same energy that once broke them now moves through them like wind through glass, leaving them unshaken, wiser, and quietly untouchable. Emotional endurance through stillness. When life tests an INFJ, the world expects them to react, to defend, to explain, to fight for understanding. But they don't. Instead, they retreat into stillness, not out of weakness, but mastery. This stillness is not the absence of emotion, it's the containment of it. Inside, storms rage, yet outwardly there's calm, composure, and quiet observation. This is how an INFJ endures, through internal equilibrium that others mistake for detachment. What looks like silence is actually survival. What looks like distance is emotional discipline. You see, the INFJ has learned that reacting too soon only feeds chaos. They've watched how emotional explosions solve nothing, and how truth often reveals itself only in patience. So they stop chasing closure and start conserving energy. Every emotion is felt deeply, but processed privately, away from noise, judgment, and manipulation. They sit with their pain, dissect it, learn its shape. They allow tears when needed, but never perform them for sympathy. That's what makes them so powerful. Their strength is invisible, their recovery internal. The world mistakes this calm for coldness, not realizing that it's forged through countless silent battles. Every moment of restraint, every choice to stay quiet when provoked becomes another layer of emotional armor. But it's not a wall, it's a filter. The INFJ no longer lets everything touch their spirit. They feel deeply but selectively. Their emotions evolve from raw reactions into refined intuition. They learn to listen to what pain is trying to teach, not just what it's trying to take. Through stillness, the INFJ discovers that healing does always require noise or validation. Sometimes it requires complete surrender, to sit in the silence and trust that the ache will sculpt them into someone wiser. That's why when others crumble under pressure, the INFJ endures, not because they feel less, but because they've mastered the art of feeling without drowning. Their quiet is not emptiness, it's control. Their stillness isn't passive, it's power disguised as peace. When they emerge, they don't need to prove how much they've suffered or how much they've overcome. Their calm presence says it all, because real endurance doesn't shout. It vibrates. It's the quiet strength that makes storms pass before the INFJ ever breaks. The gift of discernment, seeing lessons before pain repeats. The INFJ's greatest power isn't their empathy, it's their discernment. They don't just feel emotions, they read them. They see patterns before they unfold, motives before they're spoken, and endings before anyone realizes a story has begun. It's not psychic ability, it's emotional intelligence, sharpened through years of learning the hard way. Each heartbreak, betrayal, and disappointment taught them to look beyond words, beyond charm, and beyond promises. They've learned that energy never lies, and people always reveal themselves if you know how to watch. Discernment for an INFJ feels like standing in a crowded room, yet hearing the one voice that doesn't match the music. It's the uneasy silence beneath forced laughter, the micro shift in tone that exposes hidden contempt, the fleeting hesitation that betrays intent. Most people overlook these signs, but the INFJ doesn't. Their mind maps every inconsistency and stores it quietly. They don't react immediately, they observe, because time always exposes truth, and the INFJ has the patience to wait. This gift often feels like a curse in youth. They see people's duality too early, notice manipulation too easily, and sense emotional danger long before others do. It isolates them, makes them question if they're paranoid or too sensitive. But over time, discernment becomes their shield. They stop blaming themselves for seeing too much and start honoring it as protection. They realize not everyone deserves their understanding, some only crave their energy. With discernment, the INFJ stops repeating pain. They recognize when kindness is being used as currency, when apologies are just rehearsed performances, and when love is merely control in disguise. They become surgical with their empathy, generous yet precise. Their compassion remains, but it's no longer blind. And that's the silent evolution no one sees coming. The world keeps testing them, throwing familiar faces with new lessons. But the INFJ smiles quietly now because they no longer need the chaos to grow. They can see it coming and step aside before it strikes. That's the gift of discernment, turning emotional wounds into intuition so sharp that life can't surprise them anymore. They don't just survive the test, they anticipate it, disarm it, and move forward, wiser, lighter, untouchable. When empathy becomes a shield, not a weakness. For most of their lives, the INFJ's empathy felt like a double-edged sword. It connected them deeply to others, but also left them wide open to pain. They absorbed emotions that weren't theirs, tried to heal wounds they didn't cause, and carried the burdens of people who never intended to lighten theirs. The world told them empathy was their gift, but it often felt like a curse, until one day, everything shifted. The INFJ stopped using empathy to please and started using it to protect. It happens quietly, no announcement, no declaration, just a deep internal click where something finally aligns. The INFJ realizes empathy isn't about losing yourself in others, it's about understanding without absorbing. Feeling doesn't have to mean fixing, compassion doesn't have to mean compliance. They begin to see empathy not as surrender, but as strategy, the ability to read the room, sense manipulation, and step back before damage is done. What once made them vulnerable now becomes their greatest defense. They can detect emotional dishonesty instantly, recognize guilt-tripping tactics before they land, and understand that "I'm sorry" means nothing without change. Their heart remains open, but their access becomes limited. They give kindness freely, but entry selectively. The same empathy that once broke them now builds invisible armor around them, soft enough to feel but strong enough to deflect. This transformation is what confuses people who thought they knew the INFJ. They're no longer the emotional sponge who absorbs everyone's chaos. Instead, they become a mirror, reflecting truth, not soaking up dysfunction. When they sense pain in others, they no longer sacrifice themselves to fix it. They simply acknowledge it, hold space for it, and let it pass. That's emotional maturity disguised as mystery. Empathy as a shield means loving wisely, not endlessly. It's a quiet power, the kind that doesn't shout or prove. The INFJ no longer fears being too sensitive because they've learned that sensitivity without boundaries is suffering, but sensitivity with awareness is strength. And in that awareness, they find peace. The tests keep coming, but now they're met with calm observation instead of emotional collapse. Because when empathy becomes a shield, no manipulation can pierce it, and no storm can shake the INFJ who finally understands their own power. Silent growth, healing without witnesses. But the INFJ's growth rarely happens in public view. It unfolds in the quietest hours, when the phone stops buzzing, when the world forgets them for a moment, and when the noise outside finally fades enough for them to hear themselves again. Their transformation isn't dramatic or loud. It's internal, invisible, and deeply sacred. While others look for validation through visible progress, the INFJ rebuilds silently, healing in ways no one will ever fully understand. They don't post about it. They don't announce that they're working on themselves. They simply retreat, not to escape life, but to recalibrate. The solitude that once felt heavy now becomes home. In the stillness, they dissect their wounds with honesty, not self-pity. They sit with the pain until it reveals its lesson. They replay conversations, reflect on their patterns, and trace every heartbreak back to its root. It's emotional surgery, performed with grace and without applause. People often assume the INFJ has moved on because they appear calm, but that calm is earned, not gifted. Behind it are sleepless nights, quiet tears, and endless moments of questioning, followed by clarity, forgiveness, and peace. They don't rush healing. They understand that real growth doesn't happen through distraction or replacement. It happens through integration. Every scar becomes data. Every betrayal becomes wisdom. Every silence becomes strength. And when they finally emerge, they're not the same. Their aura changes, softer yet unbreakable. They no longer react to the same triggers, no longer chase understanding from people who refuse to listen. They outgrow resentment without forcing closure. They choose emotional neutrality over revenge, and that in itself is their quiet revolution. What makes the INFJ so powerful is that they don't need an audience to validate their transformation. Their healing isn't a show. It's a private evolution that redefines their soul. By the time the world notices their glow, it's already too late. They've outgrown the need to explain how they got there. Because real growth doesn't beg to be seen, it simply radiates. The INFJ's silence after chaos isn't emptiness, it's rebirth. They heal in private so that when they return, they move with the kind of peace that speaks louder than any story ever could. The power of internal alchemy, turning hurt into insight. When an INFJ gets hurt, something extraordinary happens. Not immediately, not with visible rage or retaliation, but deep beneath the surface where their mind and soul quietly meet. Pain doesn't stay as pain for long. It becomes raw material. The INFJ doesn't waste suffering. They refine it, study it, and transform it into understanding. This is their version of alchemy, turning emotional wounds into wisdom, heartbreak into compassion, and disappointment into discernment. Unlike most people, the INFJ doesn't run from pain. They walk straight into it, calmly dissecting its anatomy. They want to understand why it happened, what it reveals about human nature, about trust, about themselves. That's their secret strength. They don't seek revenge, they seek meaning. Because once they extract meaning from suffering, the hurt loses its control over them. The same experience that could have shattered them becomes the foundation of their emotional intelligence. To outsiders, it may seem like the INFJ moved on easily, but what they really did was transform internally. They rewired their empathy, recalibrated their expectations, and distilled every lesson into a kind of emotional gold. They remember the betrayal, but not with bitterness, with clarity. They recall the manipulation, but not with anger, with understanding. Their pain doesn't poison them, it evolves them. This internal transformation changes everything. The INFJ no longer fears being hurt because they've learned that pain, when faced consciously, becomes wisdom that can't be unlearned. Every scar becomes a lesson in boundaries. Every heartbreak refines their ability to love wisely. Every deception sharpens their emotional radar. It's the kind of growth you can't fake, the quiet resilience that comes from turning your darkest moments into light. And that's the beauty of the INFJ's alchemy. No one sees it happen. There's no visible process, no external sign of healing, just a person who walks into pain one way and walks out transformed, stronger, clearer, freer. The world keeps testing them, but they've learned to recycle every wound into awareness. That's why nothing can truly destroy them, because even when they're broken, they're rebuilding in secret, crafting insight from ashes. Boundaries forged in compassion, not bitterness. For the INFJ, boundaries aren't born out of anger, they're born out of wisdom. After a lifetime of overgiving, of holding emotional space for people who never returned it, they finally understand that love without limits turns into self-erasure. But when the INFJ begins to set boundaries, something profound shifts. They don't build walls to keep people out, they build doors that only open for those who knock with respect. This change doesn't come overnight. It happens after countless quiet heartbreaks, after being misunderstood for their silence, after realizing that kindness without discernment becomes self-destruction. Yet even as they pull away from those who've drained them, the INFJ doesn't become cold. They don't retaliate or wish harm. Instead, their boundaries are rooted in compassion, both for others and for themselves. They've learned that empathy without self-respect isn't empathy at all, it's martyrdom. So they start saying no softly but firmly. They decline emotional labor that isn't theirs to carry. They stop explaining why they're stepping back. They let people misinterpret their peace, knowing that understanding isn't owed and their energy is no longer up for negotiation. The beauty of their boundaries is how gentle they are, not built from bitterness, but from deep understanding of human nature. The INFJ realizes that not everyone deserves access to their heart, and that protecting their inner world isn't cruelty, it's maturity. What others see as detachment is actually discipline. What they call distance is simply the INFJ choosing peace over performance. And what once looked like rejection is now sacred self-preservation. The INFJ knows that love without boundaries leads to resentment, and resentment poisons even the purest hearts. As their boundaries become acts of grace, quiet, calm, unwavering. They don't slam doors, they close them slowly with forgiveness. They don't carry hate, they carry wisdom. Every boundary they set whispers, I still care, just not at the expense of myself. And that's where their strength lies, in knowing they can still be kind without being consumed, still compassionate without being controlled. Because true emotional power isn't about who you let in, it's about who you no longer allow to drain the light you worked so hard to rebuild. The strength of choosing understanding over revenge. When the INFJ is wronged, the temptation to prove their worth or expose someone's deceit flickers, briefly, but only briefly, because deep down they know revenge is a trap, one that ties you forever to the person who hurt you. Instead, they choose something far more powerful and far less understood. Understanding. This isn't weakness, it's mastery. While others waste their peace trying to make someone see what they did, the INFJ already sees everything and chooses peace anyway. They understand that hurt people, that betrayal is often rooted in fear, that cruelty often hides insecurity. So rather than sinking into the mud of retaliation, they rise above it, not for moral superiority, but for emotional preservation. Revenge costs energy, but understanding restores it. And the INFJ, after being drained for too long, knows exactly which side they'd rather live on. In their silence, they begin to analyze, not agonize. They see patterns where others see pain. They extract lessons where others build grudges. They transform what was meant to destroy them into insight that protects them forever. Understanding becomes their closure. The situation may have ended unfairly, but the INFJ walks away with the only prize that truly matters: clarity. This decision to choose understanding over vengeance isn't easy. It's born from countless emotional battles fought in private, from learning that validation from those who broke you is a mirage. They realize that life eventually delivers justice in its own quiet timing, and the best revenge is living free of the bitterness that traps the soul. And so they forgive, not to excuse, but to release. They stop replaying conversations that can't be fixed. They stop arguing in their heads with people who will never understand. They stop waiting for an apology that will never come. And in that stillness, they rediscover something priceless: their power. Because in a world that glorifies reaction, the INFJ's restraint is revolutionary. They don't win by striking back, they win by refusing to be pulled back. Their understanding is sharper than revenge, their silence louder than any confrontation. In choosing insight over anger, they become untouchable, proof that true power lies not in retaliation, but in emotional evolution. The rebirth after every storm, unseen but unbreakable. Every INFJ has known the kind of storm that doesn't just shake their life, it shakes their very identity. The betrayal that cuts too deep, the silence that feels too heavy, the heartbreak that tears through every layer of trust. But here's the thing about an INFJ: no matter how shattered they appear, destruction never has the final word. Their soul is made for rebirth. Quiet, steady, unseen. They don't rise with noise or fury. They rise like dawn after a sleepless night, slow but inevitable. No one sees the rebuilding process. While the world assumes they've vanished, the INFJ retreats inward to repair, to rethink, to reforge. They gather every fragment of their old self and begin transforming it into something stronger, clearer, purer. What broke them becomes the blueprint for what comes next. Each scar becomes a seam of strength, each wound a lesson in resilience. And though they may emerge changed, the essence of who they are, kind, deep, discerning, remains untouched. Only now it's refined. The world rarely notices this transformation. People who once underestimated them don't realize that the INFJ's quiet phase isn't surrender, it's incubation. Beneath the surface, they're shedding everything that no longer serves them: illusions, expectations, and attachments that once held them captive. What returns is not the same person, but a wiser, lighter one who has learned to love without losing themselves, to care without collapsing, to trust without blindness. When they finally re-emerge, there's a calm power in their presence, a grounded serenity that comes only from surviving what was meant to destroy you. They no longer chase closure, validation, or acceptance. They have all of that within now. The INFJ doesn't need the world to see their comeback. Their peace is their proof. And maybe that's the most poetic part of their story. Their rebirth is rarely witnessed, yet its effects ripple quietly through every space they enter. The same storm that once broke them now bows before their silence. They've learned that the most unbreakable people aren't those who never fall, but those who rise again with gentleness instead of bitterness. The INFJ doesn't just survive their storms, they evolve through them, becoming a masterpiece built from the wreckage. The quiet victory, passing life's tests without needing recognition. For the INFJ, victory has never been about applause. It's not about proving anyone wrong or standing in the spotlight. Their triumphs happen quietly, in the still moments when they choose peace over revenge, wisdom over impulse, self-respect over validation. While the world measures success in noise, the INFJ measures it in stillness. Their greatest wins are invisible to most, yet deeply transformative within. They've learned that strength isn't about conquering others, it's about mastering yourself when no one is watching. Each test life throws at them, betrayal, heartbreak, misunderstanding, becomes an inner exam of patience and perspective. And every time, the INFJ passes with a kind of grace that confuses those expecting chaos. They don't need to prove how much they've grown. Their calmness does it for them. They no longer explain why they walked away, why they chose silence, or why they didn't fight back. Because real mastery doesn't demand validation, it simply is. This quiet victory often goes unnoticed. The people who underestimated them move on, unaware that the INFJ they once broke has already rebuilt an entire inner universe from the rubble. They've rewritten their story without needing anyone's approval. They've forgiven silently, healed privately, and evolved beyond the need to be seen. What they gain is not recognition, but sovereignty. To outsiders, it might look like detachment, but in truth, it's liberation. The INFJ no longer needs to defend their character or justify their kindness. They've learned that peace is the ultimate revenge, and silence is the language of true confidence. They walk through the world differently now, lighter, wiser, and untouchable. Their energy no longer seeks validation. It simply radiates truth. And perhaps that's the most powerful ending to their journey, realizing that the only recognition they ever needed was their own. Every storm they've survived, every lesson they've endured, every heartbreak they've alchemized into empathy, it all leads here to quiet triumph, to spiritual freedom, to self-mastery so profound it doesn't need to announce itself. Because the INFJ's victory was never meant to be loud. It was meant to be lasting, the kind of victory that echoes in their calm, glows in their peace, and whispers one truth to the universe. I made it through without losing my soul. When an INFJ reaches this level of quiet strength, they don't seek to prove anything, they embody everything they've learned. Every wound, every disappointment, every test has carved them into something unshakable, yet still deeply human. They no longer chase understanding from others, they become the understanding. Their silence holds power, their empathy carries wisdom, and their peace tells a story that no words ever could. If this video resonated with you, it's because part of you recognizes that same quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need validation to feel real. You've been tested, you've fallen, you've rebuilt, and maybe, just maybe, you're in that silent victory phase right now. Take a second to subscribe to Brainy One, because here you're not just watching videos, you're rediscovering yourself, one realization at a time. Question for you. Which part of the INFJ's journey did you feel most connected to? Their quiet endurance or their calm rebirth? Let me know in the comments. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs today.